minutes. Okay, now I should be careful with my words. All right, and then after that Q&A session from 10 to 15 minutes, we will do what I call a challenge for each panelist. So each selected panelist, apart from the 4 panelists who have spoken before, each individual will do a 1 or 2 minutes challenge. So like an instant reflection or demonstration of what your takeaways from today's sections are. And then we would do a little bit of wrap up. And then at the end of tonight, I will send out a 1-pager of what I can say like the young leader statement. So it is 1 page of our takeaways or our reflection of the whole group of the young leaders program. I will send out in Google Doc, and then please kind of edit directly in that Google Doc, and we will finish tomorrow noon for today's session. So that's 1 page for today's session. So, and after noon, tomorrow noon, if you don't have any more comments or edits, then we'll finalize that and we'll send that to the moderator of the main event. And that's everything. Is that clear? Anyone have some question about our housekeepings? No? All right, you can always text us. Right, so should we start with the presentation? So we have 4 presentations right now, and we'll start with Ms. Gitanjali Shinharoy. Do I pronounce your name correctly?
Yeah, manageable.
Thank you very much. You have the floor, please.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So I think we've had a long day, but a very fruitful and a very interesting day. And I've had the opportunity to be presenting what I learned from session 1, which is the South China Sea in a shifting global landscape. So basically, I'll talk about what each speaker said and then my final learnings. So basically, first session covered the various aspects and the views of different countries by the speakers. In fact, the chair, the ambassador Ali Berto, he of course gave us the EU perspective, and he spoke about how the South China Sea was about greater interdependence, and he also spoke about that how there was a need to refrain from threats, exercise self-restraint, and he also highlighted that there was a need to be supportive of the code of conduct and for ASEAN as well. Okay, so going to the speaker 1, the speaker was Mr. Grossman. He gave the US perspective. He was the one who spoke. He's the one who works in RAND. So basically, he spoke that the South China Sea waters are international waters, which is very interesting to hear. Secondly, he said that China is militarily and economically only growing, and which was a major and a greater sign of concern for us. He also said that the Quad and AUKUS should take upon the work to work in the South China Sea as an order to help the maritime counterclaimants, because the maritime counterclaimants are basically stuck in the middle. And I think what I figured out from what Mr. Grossman said was there was a need of deepening political and economic cooperation in the South China Sea. And of course, China's growth needed to be controlled. So that was the speaker 1. Speaker 2, Dr. Chiang, if I've got his name pronunciation right, he spoke about the ASEAN perspective. So he spoke about volatility, he spoke about uncertainty, complexities, and ambiguities, which is what he described the South China Sea scenario to be. And the reasons he stated were, why he said that the South China Sea were these, because he said that the US-China competition structure was there. He spoke about China's military growth. He also spoke about the domestic politics, nationalism, which also impacted foreign policy. So I think what I figured out from his entire talk was one thing which I really was interested was he said that ASEAN is a normative power. And he justified it by saying that ASEAN has always been a normative power because it has been a norm-setting regional order. And this functions because of unity in the ASEAN. The other thing he said that ASEAN needs to be given more space. And he said that ASEAN shouldn't be pressurized on either of the sides. He meant either of the sides, I think the US and the China, and China, of course. Speaking of the third speaker, Dr. Dio, he spoke about the Chinese perspective, and it was rather interesting. And in fact, this was the first time I came across a Chinese speaker who was pretty upfront about a lot of things. And he also spoke about the way ahead. So he spoke about cooperation is better than conflict. He also said that the ASEAN-China dispute needed to be resolved. And what he said was Quad and AUKUS are anti-China raised by the US. So that was when my head went for a ticker. So I think what I learned from his thought, like his talk, was that he emphasized on crisis management. He also said that the code of conduct was practical. He focused on, he spoke about confidence building measures, and of course, the deepening of maritime functional cooperation and economic cooperation. Then speaker 4 was Vice Admiral Koda. He spoke about the Japanese perspective. So he started his speech with how South China Sea is the key element of security. He spoke about South China Sea from the perspective of Chinese unilateral claims. He also spoke about territorial disputes and the free use of high seas. What I took from his talk was, he said that the South China Sea is for all, and he suggested that Japan, US, India aren't outsiders, which for me, being an Indian, was pretty interesting. Also, he said that the ASEAN must go with the code of conduct, which needs to be cooperative for all. So the other speakers have also spoken about this. Speaker 5, Professor Nangi, he basically spoke about an overall view of this session. And he spoke about bilateralism and non-legalism practiced by China in the South China Sea. And what I took from his talk was there was a need for a regionalistic way of governance. And what I figured out what he meant was there was a need to look at South China Sea from a more complex and a comprehensive way. And he also, I think, focused on international law. And he said that it's important to focus on international law rather than looking at the might is right, the Machiavellian way. So finally, what I learned from this session was, of course, as Mr. Grossman very clearly stated through his facts, that how China was obviously growing to become a stronger military and economic power. And we needed to find ways to either deal with that or to convince China to not engage in such activities. So my idea was that I realized that there was a need to look at dialogue, cooperation, and conflict is a two-way passage. Second, I would say code of conduct must be focused upon, especially by ASEAN. And ASEAN, of course, shouldn't be pressurized more so by China. And ASEAN must look at greater centrality and should be supported economically and develop the entire region. Crisis risk management for earthquake, tsunami, pandemic issues needed to be dealt with, and ASEAN could take forward that. Regional order should be based on rules-based order. And of course, ASEAN could take it forward as well. And the final point, which is rather a suggestion, since 3 speakers spoke about India, it would have been nice if we had somebody from India speak about the Indian perspective and India's take on the South China Sea. So I guess next time we could have somebody. So thank you on that.
Well, thank you. That was an excellent summary and reflection. I don't think I have anything to add in here. Great. That was really excellent, I have to say. Can we move on to the next presentation, Mr. Hung from Waseda University? Oh, you have a presentation.
Yes, I made this very quick presentation in the 30-minute span that I had after the conference. So yes, reflections and thoughts on session 2. My session is on 30 years after the Cold War. The central questions, two questions. Are we in a new Cold War? And how to prevent conflict from breaking out? So are we in the new Cold War? The general consensus by the speaker is that no, we are not in a new Cold War. They pointed to a lot of differences between the current situation and the competition between US and Soviet Union. But there was a little idea at the end of the session where the discussant talked about how the Cold War happened once. It is not yet a typology that we can classify competition of a period into whether or not it's a Cold War or not. But to compare the differences, we see that now with the China-US competition, we don't have the kind of homogeneous blocks that we witnessed in the US-Soviet competition of the Cold War. That is when countries are grouped into different blocks with, and within that block, they share a common political, economic system. They have a common security threat. They even have geographical boundaries set by the blocks themselves, and they only have relationship within that block. And what is different now comparing to then is we are witnessing the emergence of a multipolar world. This is a common point addressed by several speakers as well. With the advance of technology, and we are actually in a period where countries are more interconnected, we are witnessing more interdependence between countries. And it is actually the China-US competition is happening within the same system. And the competition is about which country has the dominant position. And to say that it's a multipolar world is not to say that there is no coalition of countries and there's no bloc. We actually have, from what the speaker says, we actually have two orders. The first one is the Sino-centric order established through the Belt and Road Initiative, and there is the Community of Common Destiny. And the second one is the US-led rules-based order, consisting of the Quad and AUKUS. However, the difference between having these orders is that the members of the order actually have different interpretation of the goals and the aims of the order, and they have different priorities. As one of the speakers actually said, Japan prioritized the Senkaku Islands dispute. Vietnam prioritized the South China Sea dispute. Each of them has a different security threat that they prioritize. And however, because of these priorities, some of the countries sharing this common interest in issues such as global governance, security, economic, and technology often group together. They form coalition by themselves. We see the CTTPP, we see RCEP, we see all kinds of coalitions and grouping of countries. And one country can be a member of the US-led rules-based order, but they can also join a trade pact with China, for example. So there's no set boundaries of, and there's no set membership of the order that we're talking about. And however, in these times, it doesn't mean that conflicts are not going to happen. Conflict can still arise from accidents. And even though one speaker said that China-US incidents are infrequent, it can still happen. So how can we prevent conflicts from happening? We have the roles of the middle powers. Some mentioned South Korea, some mentioned India, and some also mentioned the increasing role of Vietnam as well. And we have the roles of regional institutions with ASEAN at the central. The core to prevent conflicts is to increase the buffer role of these middlemen. And to do that, it is important to maintain unity, as well as expanding cooperation, and not just military security, but also in economic, in climate change, in technological sharings, etc., etc. But it's also worth pointing out that all of the speakers actually pointed to the lack of effective crisis management and de-escalation mechanism. Mr. John Bradford, a discussant at the end of the session, actually said that even with existing mechanism, we still are witnessing incidents and accidents that can happen. So maybe not establishing new rules, but rather empowering what we have is perhaps a better choice. And I have some thoughts on the session. So to conclude, the session actually put a heavy emphasis on similarities and differences between current situation and the Cold War, with the conclusion that we are not actually in new Cold War. And they gave general recommendations on how to avoid conflicts, such as empowering middle powers, ensuring ASEAN centrality through maintaining unity. But one of the things that I find lackluster is perhaps there's no mention of specific actions, or mentioned very briefly and were not discussed at length. There was a presentation by Dr. Shushan Luo when she mentioned several concrete steps that ASEAN can take. However, there were no question raised for to discuss more on the actions. And speakers talk about de-escalation mechanism, but what factors allowing state to de-escalate? What factors force them to escalate the crisis? There were no concrete, there were no detailed specific analysis on those factors. I hope that there will be in the next conference. And also leaders talk about ensuring the unity of ASEAN, but ASEAN is already being carefully criticized for disunity. And we see early fragility of ASEAN in 2012, where we don't have a joint statement after the foreign minister meeting. So how to unity of ASEAN actually answer the questions of how to resolve the disunity first. And I don't think that any speakers actually talk about this. So those are some of my thoughts and the reflections on session 2.
Thank you, Mr. Hung. It's also a really excellent presentation of yours. Me personally, I have three questions, just food for thought after listening to your presentation. So my first question, it would be, like you said about we are having a Sino-centric order, and then on the second hand, we have a US-led rules-based order. So I wonder, so before all this, what kind of order do we have in Asia, or do we actually have an order in a security structure in Asia or not? So that's my first question. My second thought is that whether or not superpowers really allow middle countries to really have a voice in this reordering region, because you said that middle countries will have a voice. So I wonder whether or not the big powers will allow that, really allow that. And then the third question, the third thought that came up from my mind is that what should actually small countries in the region do? Because there's always a saying that we should not choose size, we should choose principles and interests instead. But would that really be feasible and doable? So those are actually my three concerns. I'm not asking you directly, but I'm just some food for thought. Right, excellent. So can we move on actually to the next presentation? That's from Miss Alisa Angie Taupan.
Hi, everyone.
Please, you have the floor.
Good
Hi.
afternoon. Hello. So I am Alisa from the Philippines. So I'll be presenting to you my takeaways from the third session. So firstly, applying for this program, I had cleared my expectations and tried to eradicate my initial views and thoughts for the issue at hand. But today, I was once again revisited with my initial thoughts, but this time injected with brilliant and insightful inputs from our research speakers today. So I participated to speak for this session for the reason that I find the subject very interesting. For 5 years, since the time that the Tribunal Award was given to my country, the Philippines, I questioned why China was able to decline the decision of the Tribunal of Hague, which is a very powerful court and very much supported in the international world. So that's why I really wanted to deep dive on this session. So to start, I would be sharing my very significant key takeaways from these speakers, and then my personal feelings about that, something like that. I did not make a summary, I'm so sorry, but I just nitpicked the most significant parts that I think that's important to share. So let's start with my first speaker, which is Professor Jay from the University of the Philippines. So fun fact, University of the Philippines is actually my dream university, but it's difficult to get in because it's such a great university. So he shared the petroleum activities taking place in the EEZ zones of this Asean nations. And he also said that there's an increase of this activity. And to the point that it's crossing EEZs and also overlapping with other EEZ zones of these countries. But yes, those points are equally very significant to his discussion. But what really caught my ear as a listener and also a panelist of the session was his mention of the provision of the tribunal, of having not just negotiations, but the meaningful ones, meaningful negotiations in which everyone that's involved or the stakeholders would have very equitable benefits. And I think that's very important, especially on the situations like the current issue on the South China Sea, right? So I think that's the main point that I really got from him. And then he was followed by the second speaker. I think another point to add from Professor Jay's discussion is that we should always remember that these people are not fighting for their power to the world, but rather they just want to fight for the rights of their people in their livelihoods. So I think it's very important that we negotiate about those things and not on the interest of just the political power, but also the rights of the people. And I think that was reiterated by Professor Jay. And then next is the second speaker, Dr. Lin. In Dr. Lin's presentation, I was once again refreshed of the idea of baselines, which I forgot because I just took that course when I was in first year college. And I think it was very important that he really discussed the baselines because it is what we consider as the boundaries of each countries from another countries, and what it is the division of the high seas and the economic zones, or the zones that we could touch or we could exploit with natural resources, right? And I think that's very important because that's the evidence of the Philippines that was put forward to the tribunal, right? So that I highly appreciated because once again, I got to understand where was the Philippines standing and where was this other nation standing and what are they fighting for. And then the following speakers really put into the table what happened with the SCS Tribunal Award. So Professor Nishimoto and Mr. Andrew provided us the foundation for us to understand where the progress went, because there was a 5-year in the middle, right? And there was no really relevant news that I have heard, or maybe just me, or there was really no big news about this tribunal award. So I think that's very important that they put that on the table and we discuss that. And then they showed us also the tools that the UNCLOS can offer for the problems in the sea, because there are many problems in the sea and not all of us know that there are many solutions that UNCLOS could provide for us. Their presentation also provided us or showed us that China has a very distinct perspective of the UNCLOS because of course, they were rejected of the ownership to some parts of the South China Sea by the Hague Tribunal. And because of that rejection, they assert that the UNCLOS was a political tool that was used against them. They felt that they were attacked, but in reality, they were not attacked. It was really part of what they signed in UNCLOS, right? So, but when China declined or denied the decision, I was thinking, was China looking down on UNCLOS? Because UNCLOS is really internationally supported, right? And I was thinking maybe China was looking down on UNCLOS, but maybe not. But in reality, whatever may happen, the statements made by China really challenged the overarching ability of UNCLOS to deal with the issues relating to our world seas. And now, saving my very favorite discussion from Dr. Yanyan, our last speaker for the session 3. She was my favorite because she gave me a very new perspective to view, because I have never thought about this, that I've never viewed China being on the victim side, because just like what she said a while ago, media portrays China as the bad guy and we never really understand what's on the other side, right? So I find that very interesting. So Dr. Yanyan said that UNCLOS, even on its most significant contribution to the world, in reality is vague and ambiguous, which I agree on, but not on its entirety, because UNCLOS vagueness is just a little part, leaves room for gaps in personal interpretation to some states, making them just leave it like that, like what China did. They used their historical evidences to get away from that decision. saying UNCLOS that is not enough, is not an attack to the convention's value, but rather it is an emphasis to their very own statement in which cooperation is important. So that is why for UNCLOS, it is also important that they cooperate with other international laws, such as the Treaty of Amity in 1976, that can help us resolve the issue and not just make generalized solutions, but make tailored solutions for the issue. And to tie up this speech, I would like to share on my personal note that at the end of the day, even with the most biggest issues between states, dialogue and discussions are very important because we have walked in the difficult events affecting our states and our people to come to this level of development in diplomacy and discussing things without violence. So let us settle to the ways we have promised to do so that we avoid the greater misunderstandings. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Alice. I think that's the session. That's the most heated session of today, and you were really spot on with your reflections. I think there's one takeaway from that is that the UNCLOS is actually it has to be, and it is the central has a central role of providing legal arguments of all countries. I mean, regardless of how you interpret it, and regardless of how countries want to, use the UNCLOS for their own advantage. But you also said a very important point is that I think we need more voices from our Chinese counterparts. I mean, not everyone has to agree with them, but I mean, it's healthy if we can have a frank and open and more intensive discussion with them. Right, thank you. Also, we actually will move to the last presentation of today. Sorry. So Miss Wu Haidang, right? Did I pronounce it?
Yes. Good evening, everyone.
Yeah, you have the floor.
Okay. So my presentation is on the affairs to the facts, history, and the South China Sea, which is a privilege for me because personally, as a future aspiring academia, I'm actually not a big fan of the historical discourse. So just to have like an opportunity to get exposed to this panel is very interesting and insightful for me. So I want to start with the first speaker of the panel, Mr. Carr. He illustrated the South China Sea from the Chinese perspective and why China claimed sovereignty on the area. So just basically going through his point, he pointed out the historical artifacts. He pointed out the engagement between Chinese government, antique Chinese government with French colonialism in Vietnam or Japanese colonialism. I think it was very convincing, but if we look a little bit deeper into the authenticity and the legitimacy of his claims, I think it's quite questionable because there's nobody else, there's no proving mechanism coming from international body to prove that these historical artifacts are legit or they're real. And it didn't help with his historical discourse when he was followed by Dr. Bill Hayton, and he discussed a development which is, I think, unknown for most people and not even me. And he talked about the event in 1899 when China denied responsibility for Paracel at the time. And I think this is one of the biggest takeaway for me. And I can see that Dr. Bill Hayton was also very critical of the Chinese perspective, especially the Chinese historical claim on the area. One thing that I had to disagree with Dr. Bill Hayton is that he basically said that, oh, this is going to be a long game. So everyone, every state should keep their status quo and not trying to push this brinkmanship anymore. And the future generation will take charge of it. And I think this is a very normal political things that happening in the world right now, where older generation just dumping the responsibility on us because they focus more on their own benefit. And I think this is something that we young people need to be aware of, and also actively engage in whatever happening in the world right now, so we can take charge and say, no, we and you and every generation should be in charge of this problem, and not just our problem. I'm sorry, am I making any sense? But moving on to Dr. Monique, she talks a lot about the significance and the legacy of the San Francisco system or San Francisco Agreement. But rooting from my experience in Japan, I was studying Japanese foreign policy in Japan. And from my understanding is that the San Francisco system is actually, or the Treaty of San Francisco is very heavily based on the Japan-US dynamic at the time. And they focus on the Japan-US alliance system. And to be honest, like the sovereignty of the South China Sea is actually an afterthought, but she, and later on, Dr. Wu Haidang, he actually putting out two common misunderstanding regarding the San Francisco Treaty, which I think I agree with that. The first one is the treaty actually didn't clarify or specify the sovereignty to any party, any claimant. And the second one is there was no trusteeship agreement regarding to the sovereignty of the Spratly Island. And I couldn't agree with that more. And moving on to the last presenter of the night, Dr. Wu Haidang, he tried to establish his or Vietnamese stance on sovereignty. And he also used some very, well, not very, but soundingly credible or soundingly legit source. But if we also look deep into that, there's not much of legitimacy or authenticity behind that. I think one of the things he used is some writings or reports coming from the Nguyen dynasty. And because if we go back to Mr. Carr's presentation and we put these things into juxtaposition, it just, this conversation is very your words against mine. And there's no one there, and there's no international body to like clarify that or authenticate it. So which bring me to like the three big questions that I've been very concerned with ever since the ending of the panel. The first thing is that will historical discourse or the use of historical evidence be like, does it have any advantages, or does it really add in any benefit to the conversation? And because we've been going through this road like so many times, it didn't help. And what it did help is to build up just nationalism in Vietnam, in China, in Philippines, surrounding these islands. And I don't think it's a positive development at all, because it's just building up such a mirror image among like neighbors together, and it didn't really translate into any cooperation or at least harmonious coexistence. And I want to go back to the role of young people, because that was struggling me the most about Dr. Bill Hayton's claim, as he basically dumped the responsibility on young people. So I just want to put it out there to everyone in the conversation that, what do you think that we should do? Should we wait until the old people mess things up for us, and then we will have to come up with anything, or we'll just try to stick with the status quo and then dump it on the next generation? Like, what should we do as young people, young generation? And I guess that's the end of my presentation. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you, Nguyen. I just only want to add, or maybe one or two things. I think for me personally is, I mean, historical evidences, they are important. The relics they are important, but this is for me, it's more like a war of narratives. So the countries use historical evidence to build, find evidence to support their narratives to win the battle of legitimacy. In support with other battles of legal battles and political battles or military or on-site battles, and the thing is that we are living in a world of fake news, and we can also living in a world of fake historical evidence and relics. So countries who occupied the islands, they actually can fabricate historical fake from historical evidence or relics on site on those islands. So that's something we should also be very careful about. But I'm a big fan of history. So that session was one of the most interesting session to me personally. Yeah, actually,
Professor,
I'm
can
not a
I
professor.
add on something?
I'm not a professor.
Oh, sorry. Can I add on one last thing that I forgot to include in
Sure,
my
please.
presentation?
Please.
Talking about the fake news, phenomenon that we're living in the world today. Yeah, it's very hard to find a good sources. And today, when Dr. Wu Haidang, when he shared his screen with Wikipedia source, it was such a letdown for me, because in such a prestigious and credible conferences, we still resort to those unclarified and questionable sources. And it's such a taboo in academia. And to be honest, I was really let down when I saw that happening. But
yeah, we should criticize him for that. Right. So we are actually now into the kind of discussion session, and we'll do it very briefly in like 10 or 15 minutes. Maybe if there's no volunteer here in the room and in the online session, I would like to call somebody. As I said yesterday, that I will be a very mean professor, but I'm not a real professor, but I will be very mean. So I really want to hear voices or reflections from Noah, because and Khánh An and Lâm Trần, because you guys spoke in the big sections today. Maybe you can share with us some of your views on the presentations or today as a whole.
Of course, can I go first then, maybe? Personally, I was particularly interested in the first and the fourth sessions, particularly with regards to the disparities on how any sort of negotiating strategy would be achieved. But what seemed to be clear from especially the first session was that pretty much every party involved is heavily in support of negotiations, whatever those negotiations may be. Probably the most interesting speaker personally was Professor Stephen in the first session, about when he was talking about the international impact of any sort of conflict in the South China Sea. So personally from the UK, that's of importance to me, and across to the US and Canada and India, the countries involved that may be potentially at the moment are not necessarily being involved quite as much. So yeah, that may be my main thought. There would be additional involvement of international bodies that maybe are beyond the region itself.
So we don't hear you anymore. Were you muted?
Oh, sorry, I think that was the end of what I had to say.
All right, thank you. Lâm and Khánh An, I would like to hear what you think.
Can you guys hear me okay? All right. I really love the question that Alisa mentioned before about China as a bad guy, and whenever it comes to China, first I must disclaimer that I'm not agree with China as China's behavior in the South China Sea. But whenever it comes to China, I always wonder that is this a toxicity trap, like we just overact because of our fear of China's behavior, or is that the right things we should do to contain China's rise? So I think that China is not really a bad leader for now, but it's on its way to learn to be the world leader. And it's not because that is China, but any country that rise to affects the U.S. moral leadership will face the same scenario. So that's my thought about China. And the other point that I really love is when Dr. Cheng mentioned about ASEAN has the normative power. Whenever I do research about ASEAN, it's broke my heart when people keep mention that ASEAN don't really have the central role or the power at all. But I am really believe that ASEAN do have the central role in this region, and just like Dr. Chang mentioned before, that we have the role to set the norms, set the rules. And I think that the best way to think of the role of ASEAN is just think of one day if ASEAN don't really exist. So that's how I always believe that ASEAN really have the centrality in this region. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just only want to add because you mentioned ASEAN, and I work in foreign affairs policy, and I have to confirm that ASEAN is one of the most important pillar of Vietnamese foreign affairs policy. And for those who still have doubts about ASEAN, I just want to say that we will make sure Vietnam will make sure that ASEAN will keep its centrality role in this region. Right. Lam, maybe can you share with us something?
Yeah. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. So I was really interested when the speaker started talking about the Cold War system, the post-Cold War system, which I argue to be a US-centric one. So please challenge me on that. And then the current system that we're having right now, which is a Sino-centric one and the US-led rule-based system. And then I'm really interested when Professor Nagy talked about approaching the issue of South China issue, not only from a political and military perspective, but also from an economic and developmental aid perspective. And from that, I would argue that from those two perspectives, the middle power coming, they do have a really important role and great leverage in terms of to help balancing all the issue. So for example, with the issue of developmental aid, Japan definitely play a big role as one of the biggest ODA investor in Southeast Asia. Then they not only playing like the role of like investing money or like balancing, but they also take the leadership role. And we can see that with how Japan led CPTPP right after US abandoned the agreement. So just from those two really brief example, we do see that middle power have great leverage and influence in the region as a whole. And so that is reason is for to integrate and for ASEAN to integrate and cooperate and reaching out more to middle power to make them as our ally. And I think that one concrete way we can start doing with that is including them on platform like this. I think someone mentioned that we should hear more from an Indian perspective earlier. So that definitely can be a way forward. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lam from Johns Hopkins. Arif, I see you raise your hands, and then Arif is me, right?
Okay, hi, thank you, Dr. Kitrong. So I would like just to share my two opinions. First, it's interesting when it was raised on the point of Sino-centric orders and US-led orders, in this region. But for me, I think we must understand that these two major power bring different package to our table. So if we see this Sino or Chinese-centric orders is more on economic part through all this BRI, and well, the United States led order is mostly through the security and military pact. That's why we have a quad, of course, for Malaysia and Singapore, we are been in FPDA. So for me, it's very important. I think for some ASEAN members like Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia, we are the country partners, United States under Maritime Security Initiative Program, MSI. So you see, like different orders bring different packages to our table. So I think it's about the wisdom of ASEAN member state leaders to navigate through these two major powers and avoid ourselves from being sandwiched by two major powers. I think many scholars always argue that ASEAN must not be a sandwich between US and China rivalry in the region. That's where we go to the point number 2 on the ASEAN centrality. I think looking at the panel during the session 3, we heard a few times, the point on the ASEAN centrality and the unclosed centrality was raised. So of course, if we're looking at the realism perspective, yes, Chinese claim are obviously excessive and illegal, and it was sanctioned by the arbitral tribunal's rulings in 2016. No dispute on that. But looking to be practical and moving forward in promoting the practical peace and order at sea, the only key platform for ASEAN to engage China constructively to talk about the South China Sea dispute is through COC. So if we look at the unclosed centrality, if we wanted to unclose centrality, if we have any dispute we cannot resolve, then we refer to Article 74.3 and Article 3 of UNCLOS, where we talk about the provisional arrangement of the practical nature. But COC is not the case for this, because as we know that the Chinese claim is not mutually recognized by the ASEAN claimants. So COC is not part of the UNCLOS 74.3 and 53. So this is where my point is, probably UNCLOS is important, but to be practical on the solution for the peaceful in the South China Sea, because we cannot talk about the territorial dispute settlement. What we can only talk practically in the next probably 10 years is how to prevent conflict and de-escalation in the South China Sea. So that's why I think a COC is really a game changer for de-escalation and conflict prevention mechanism. And for me, a COC is rather a political than a legal instrument, because it's just a platform for taking people to talk. I know we've always been criticized by our EU friends that compared to the EU modality in ASEAN is like a talk shop. Always talk, but no concrete solution, no unity. But it is very interesting to see that the only way to prevent a conflict is by talking. So that's why we always have always a platform to engage and talk with each other. So I think for me, because COC is very important, because now we are talking about the future second reading on the COC text. So I think probably the only lack of session 3 is they not really discuss on how the COC model should be for a better and brighter future of the ASEAN China in the relation in the South China Sea. And that will also raise the 2 questions. Number 1 is what about the COC membership? Because now we have many players in the South China Sea, not just ASEAN and China. We have the United States, India, Australia, and France, UK. So are we going to open COC to them as well? So they will also, indirectly also legally bind to the COC, so that everyone can exercise the safe constraint in the South China Sea. And my second and last question on COC is, if any dispute arising from the interpretation or the application of the COC document, how we want to resolve it? Should we go to the unclosed dispute settlement mechanism, or COC should have its own mechanism? So I think this is the fair point where we want to have a foot of thought, ASEAN centrality versus unclosed centrality in the moving forward practically for the South China Sea dispute. Yeah, so that's what from me. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Arif. You are not actually in the list. I would like to add you in the list with participants, panelists. And so you have the floor now, and then Mr. Naim. Thank you.
Yes. First, I would like to thank all the panelists for your insightful presentation. And
So it's me first and then Mr. Naing. So you have the floor right now, but we cannot see your face. You have to push your webcam further. Yeah.
Okay, my apology. Is it better now? Yes, first I would like to thank all the panelists for your very insightful presentation and thought. And I also really agree with what Arif said about a COC-centered order, because when we talk a lot about ASEAN and how we should include all the stakeholders in the negotiation, we have to really consider who are the stakeholders, because usually ASEAN unity is mentioned a lot as a stance that ASEAN should adopt in the fight in the South China Sea. But we have to remember ASEAN is deeply divided among its members regarding the interest on the South China Sea. And we have to recall the situation in 2012 and 2016 when Cambodia blocked ASEAN from reaching a joint statement when it tried to mention the South China Sea issue. So if we were to include all the stakeholders in the negotiation, maybe we can consider reflecting on who actually have an interest to discuss South China Sea issues, instead of trying to include all the ones that have a neutral stance on the South China Sea and don't really want to have a voice. So what Arif said about opening the COC to related interested parties, and it really makes me want to think about the stakeholders in the stance that ASEAN should take. Should we discuss it as a whole, or should we only apply unilateralisms when only interested parties are included in the negotiation? It's just my personal point of view, and I hope it provides food for thoughts for the panel as well. Thank you, and I yield the floor back to Mr. Chung.
Well, actually, we do not have much time, but I see here 5 hands. So I would try to accommodate all the 5 hands, but please keep your interventions short and brief. So Mr. Naing, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. My discussion is about the core scenario. China is trying to build the Asian values to stand against the Western values. China his own financial institutions to against the Western values. For Asian values, they are always like non-interference to the national affairs of each of the country, like the sovereignty of the other countries. So these are mostly like the authoritarian regime, like my country, like most those of the norms of the Asian values. But in Western values like EU, so they give us some of the extent of the sovereignty, and they try to like the liberal orders in the world. So in my opinion, in the future, there might be 2 competing blocks, like the Cold War scenarios. But there might be some kinds of competition between the Asian values and Western values. The second point of my discussion is I agree with the previous panelists. ASEAN has struggled to build their standpoints, because ASEAN is very divided with different regimes, different cultures, different practice, very diverse issues. So to biggest collective standpoint to against the aggressive behaviors of China in the South China Sea. Some aspects encourage ASEAN to reconsider the decision-making mechanism, like consultation mechanisms. So my point of view is if ASEAN need to reconsider their decision-making mechanism, because very diverse nature of our region. As not from the South China Sea district, for my country, ASEAN have no proof of the concrete actions like the military coup and the brutal behaviors of the country. So we must need to consider the founding principles of the decision-making mechanisms to accelerate the activities of the ASEAN in the war affairs. That's my discussion. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ng. So next would be Ha Anh and then Ha Việt Hà, and I would have Cao Hùng to wrap up for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Regarding Hami questions and Hami concern, first I want to come back to the ASEAN centrality of Hainan. So I agree that ASEAN has the centrality, but what is ASEAN centrality here, like in specific? So to me, I think that most ASEAN country member states are in developing countries, so it is very hard to say that we have centrality regarding power or economic development, but I think that ASEAN has the role as a connector in the Indo-Pacific region, because US and China conflicts are now pivot to Indo-Pacific, so ASEAN role here is to create a platform to resolve the regional and international issues in the region. And so with that background, should we welcome other partners, other stakeholders to join regional issues such as South China Sea? So I think that in interdependent war, yeah. So and in the first session, I remember one speaker say that South China Sea is not the regional issues only. Here it is like international problem, and because it's affect navigation, it's not sovereignty only. Yeah, so I think to welcome other key stakeholders or partners is a very good to have different perspective and to make the issues become more multifaceted. And also it is the way to improve ASEAN status in international community, counter with a big nation such as China in the region. However, although we welcome perspective from everywhere, from nations that have interest in South China Sea, but regarding sovereignty, it should be resolved among ASEAN nations and China. And to improve that, we should have ASEAN unity, and it's a very big concern that everyone here should think about further and then find the solutions in the future as a young leader. Thank you. That's my point.
Really interesting. Thank you. Ha, you have the floor, and then Hùng, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chung. Yes, I will try to speak quickly. I think there is another issue, a small issue, but I think will have big impact, and I want to talk about the misuse of terminology. I remember in the third session today, I heard a panelist from China, Dr. Yan Yan, talk about China reclamation in the South China Sea. But in my opinion, she missed one point, that there are differences between land reclamation and island building. And what China did in the South China Sea is island building, not only land reclamations, and the act of transforming low tide and submerged features to artificial islands by harmful measures to the maritime environment. This is a breach of the UNCLOS and international environmental law. So yes, please everyone be careful when you choose the word. Yes, I want to give the floor back to Mr. Chung.
Yeah, thank you, Ha. It's interesting. Now, Hùng, you are the last man.
Yes, I'll try to wrap up really quick. Because Hami's point about excluding some countries, like Cambodia allows, to be frank, outside of the questions and only bring in interested countries with interest into the discussion. actually, that one is very similar, has a very similar nuance to the argument of a speaker today, who is Mr. Corsican, who argued that we should revoke the membership of Laos and Cambodia because they sowed the seed of disunity within ASEAN themselves. So actually, I think my point here is we talk about ASEAN unity, but then we talk about kicking members out. We talk about excluding members from ASEAN-led discussion. Is that a really good way to foster ASEAN unity? And is it really that by division, we are actually showing China resoluteness and showing that we have the strength in numbers? You know, there is a Vietnamese adverb about, you know, being grouped together, then we are strong, and being divided, then we are weak. Then really excluding members and bringing only countries' interest would improve it, or would be harder? I think it's a very good question, food for thought.
Thank you, Hùng. And I see a last hand is raising. So, Nhung, you have the last words.
Yeah, I first tend to give my reflection, but at first I want to give my opinion about Kan Ang's answer. I think her answer is interesting because it's a different way of thinking. But Kan Ang, in my opinion, China is not bad right now. It's your answer, but I think in some context, China is sort of bad. For example, if you look at the Teen Shop framework, or about the politicians' orientation, is bad. Can I give my reflection today?
Pardon?
Do I have time?
Yeah, sure. Just go ahead. You have like 1 or 2 minutes. You actually can do your challenge.
Yeah, okay. Because I can't remember all the names of the speaker, so I will look at my take notes today. Amongst a lot of presentations today, I like the presentation of Kevin Root and Mr. Wu Haidang the most, because I find some sarcastic points in the presentation of Mr. Wu Haidang, and in the presentation of Kevin Root. I think his presentation is good, and it convinced me, because I think he's listed on the present problems of Asian country and the South China Sea right now. And he also points out the main task of Asian country, that is the unity. And I also noticed the second one speaker, that is Mr. Natalegawa, the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia. I remember he said one sentence that is, Asian could not remote the signing process of COC alone, and they have to face on or call for the contact channel such as the world. And he's also expressed his disappointment on the COC signing process. And when I heard that, I'm just thinking, if you don't believe in yourself, you're Asian people, but if you don't believe in yourself, who can believe in you? And I also noticed one speaker, that is Mr. Ding Po. Yeah, his name in Chinese I don't know, but as I speak out Pinyin, it is Ding Po. He's also emphasized one man I remember, that is the employment of DOC is still of great significance. He emphasized the role of DOC, and without that, I'm just I think it's ridiculous, because I think DOC is just a regulatory document with no legal validity. How could he say that? Because I think maybe because he is a Chinese. And the last one, this is the presentation. If Mr. Bill Haidang is unfortunately, because I had the test in the afternoon, so I just had a little time passing by. So it's lucky for me. I listened for one point. I think is really interesting. That is Mr. Haidang said that two claims. The first claim is emotional claim based on belief, of course, and the second claim is claims based on documents. And it's recall It's recalled me to my lecturer teachings that Miss Ngọc Minh Trang, she used to say to me that, yes, it is belief, but if you don't put any efforts against it, it may become an international custom one day. Yeah, this is my lesson. Thanks very much for listening.
Oh, thank you, Yung. That was great. Actually, our discussion, I feel like our discussion is more interesting than comparing to the panelists. Actually, we have a lot of, we don't have much time, and we still have people who haven't spoken, and I know your name. At least 3 people here. It's Miss Nga, Miss Manasi, and Miss Pantitra, right? So I will not be mean. I will not call you today. I will not ask you to speak today, but I will be mean tomorrow. So tomorrow I will ask you to share with us your reflections, your ideas on tomorrow's section. How we are running on time? We still have like 10 minutes? No?
Yes, we have 7 minutes left.
Okay. Okay. So what I really want to do is still do this challenge, but it's not a 1 or 2 minutes challenge. So I changed my mind because we don't have much time. So it's like 1 takeaway challenge. So I would like each person will give us, give the room the like 1 single takeaway, biggest takeaway that you came out of the session today, and you go, that's 1 takeaway that stick in your head. And please do it very short. You don't have to explain why you think it's the biggest takeaway. Just name it. Name the takeaway of yours. And we'll do it in the order of our list. You still have the list. So first will be Noah, and then Ajitawan, and then Jitan Jerry. Please, Noah, go ahead. What is your biggest takeaway? You still here? Okay, I think he left. Ajitawan? Anymore? Alisa Ajitawan. Nope. Okay. I'll put them in the blacklist. All right. Okay, I do this. I call it in the order of the webcam I see here. So Hu, you go ahead first. What is your 1 biggest takeaway?
Centrality of ASEAN unity. Yes, that's the 1 big takeaway from the session.
Should we abandon it or should we preserve it?
That's the question.
Great, I agree with you. Right, next will be Nga, Phan Quỳnh Nga, please.
So in my opinion, I want to emphasize the importance of UNCLOS in all of the South China Sea issues. And I think that all of the maritime entitlements should be made based on the UNCLOS. And also ASEAN should accelerate the process of negotiating COC that match with international laws and including UNCLOS. And so overall, my biggest takeaway today is the importance of UNCLOS. Thank you.
Thank you. That's actually 2 takeaways in 1 takeaway. Great. An, Khánh An, you're next.
That South China Sea issues is not a new Cold War. If we call it a new Cold War, it just oversimplify these issues.
Great, that's excellent. Nhung, you're next. You should open your mic, please.
Yeah, mine is historical evidence from Mr. Wu Haidang.
All right, Lum, you're next.
Yeah, my main takeaway is that like amid all these new coalition and blocs like AUKUS and Quad, there might be a risk for a coalition to lose its own relevancy as the apex. So there's a really need for ASEAN to pull its act together to prove unity and to increase its influence over. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Me, you are next.
Yes, my key takeaway is that I've talked about a lot about ASEAN Center, so I will talk about history instead. I think that history is true. It's a war of narrative and it can be very subjective. So it is more effective to focus on using international law and especially the UNCLOS. And I want to also highlight the use of South China Sea arbitration in 2016 as a reference point for interpreting and applying relevant UNCLOS provisions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Me. Ha Anh, you next.
Okay, so my key takeaway today is I have more, I suspect more about historical evidence when talk about South China Sea, and I think we should think about how to collaborate historical evidence with international law.
Thank you, Ha Anh. Việt Hà, you are next.
That's my takeaway from today's session. Everything can be misinterpreted. Terminology can be misused, as I have just said. History can be misused. History can be misexplained, and international law can be misinterpreted. So we young people, young researchers should be careful whenever we read anything, and as well as we should have enough knowledge so as to not to get lost from this misuse or misexplanations or misinterpretation.
Great, you are such a philosopher. Manasi, you are next.
Yes, sir. So my biggest takeaway in this conference was that in order to tackle the conflict of South China Sea, there needs to be a sense of cooperation among nations and also the focus on international law. That's it.
Great, thank you. Arif?
Yeah, my key takeaway is ASEAN can do much better with South China Sea, and of course, well, legal is very important issue, but we also must develop it into other non-legal issues such as marine environmental protection, the impact of climate change to the baseline. No, this will be the future-proof issues that might escalate more conflict than what we had today. So, I mean, the brighter future is we cannot resolve it's okay, but whether we move forward and look at something that we can commonly discuss and address. Yeah.
Thank you. Jitanyari?
Yeah, I personally believe that my takeaway would be that ASEAN should maintain itself as a regional order while keeping in mind the rules-based, international order, and of course, keeping in mind the code of conduct.
Oh, great, thank you. Naing Minkant?
My takeaway is like each country has its own narratives and facts of the historical claims. So we need to more consider the interest and the reason behind those claims. We need to, instead of debating upon the historical evidence at first, we need to find more common grounds in the strategic interest in the political, economic, security, and trade, also natural resources matters. That's my takeaway. Thank you.
Thank you, Win.
Oh, you mean me?
You.
Yeah, I guess my biggest takeaway is the importance of diversity and compromise both together, I guess.
Great. I still see Panchitra here. Are you available to talk? Panchitra from Thailand? No? All right. I think we're coming to the end of the session today. I'm really happy with what we have discussed and the depth and the richness and the dynamics of the discussion. I think our discussion is more open and frank, much better than some moments in the main sessions today. I really hope we can continue this tomorrow. what we're going to do this tonight is we're going to send out one pager, kind of a statement of our young leaders on the first day, and we will send out a Google Doc. And please do really kind of edit and write in that Google Doc, and we're going to finalize tomorrow noon. And also, I already sent out another Google Doc, which we have the list of panelist profiles, and it's still lacking some of your profiles and your best Instagram picture. So please include your profile, your bio, in your picture in the Google Docs, so that we can compile that list and we can share it later on. And for tomorrow, we will start at what time we start tomorrow? 5:30 Hanoi time, right? Anyway, we start tomorrow 6:45. Okay, so we start tomorrow 6:40 p.m. Hanoi time, and we will do the same kind of agenda like today. We have 4 presentations, and then we have some discussions like today, and maybe we come up with one person, one takeaway at the end. Yeah, and that's actually it. Thank you very much for enduring with us until now. I know it's a long day, but you are really, you're really strong and, willing to learn. I really hope to see you guys tomorrow with the same spirit, and have a good rest. Tomorrow will be a long day again. Goodbye, yeah. Let's see.